So, I'm going to tell a story about my grandfather. Now, I'm old enough that I had living relatives who I remember who used to work in the woods before a time when lumberjacks could leave. They would, when they went into the woods, they went in for the winter. And they would live in, cabins and stuff. And my grandfather was the camp cook in one of these cabins, and he was given not only the job of cooking, but he was also responsible for ordering all the supplies. Now, one day he noticed that somebody was stealing molasses. Now, back in those days, when you ordered supplies, everything would come in big barrels or in big bags, and the molasses that he would bring in for the winter would come in a big barrel. And he noticed that the molasses was going down a lot quicker than he was using it. And he decided he'd better find out who was taking it, because he was responsible for all the supplies. So what he did was, one morning after he'd given all the men their breakfast, he went out to the supply shed where he kept everything stored. And he got himself hidden down in behind some barrels and some big bags of potatoes and what have you. And he waited till he knew the men were leaving for the woods. And while he was there, all of a sudden he heard the door fly open. And he heard somebody come in. And he peeked up just to see who it was. He couldn't believe what he saw. It was a bear. It might have been the same bear that Selena was talking about earlier, because that bear was there for some molasses. That bear made his way over to the barrel, and he kind of popped the top up off the barrel, and he stuck his arm way down into the barrel, and he came up, his arm covered in molasses. And my grandfather thought, well, of course, bears love sweet things. He's going to eat the molasses. But he didn't. Instead, that bear, with his arm still up in the air and his three other paws, he walked out the door. And then he walked over to a path that went through the woods down towards the river. And my grandfather was really curious. He thought, where's this bear going? So he followed him down to the river. And when he got down there, he hid in behind a little evergreen, and he was watching. And he saw that bear walk out into the river, arms still up in the air. And he thought, well, this is really strange. Why would the bear go down to the river to wash his arm off? He just got the molasses on. It didn't make any sense. But that's not what he did. You see, there was a little sandbar out in the river, and the bear, he walked out to that sandbar, and he put his arm, kept his arm right up there in the air. And all of a sudden, bugs started coming around. Lots of bugs, flies, they were all going around. And my grandfather thought, of course, bears eat bugs. He's just collecting up bugs, and they're going to stick to the molasses. He's going to have a feast of bugs. That makes perfect sense. But that's not what happened. You see, he kept that arm up in the air, and the bugs were coming around. And all of a sudden, trout started jumping out of the water, trying to get the fish. My grandfather said he couldn't believe what he was watching. And all of a sudden, that bear started swatting trout over onto the shore. 3 trout, 6 trout, 9 trout, 12 trout. Big ones he knocked over onto the shore. And then all of a sudden, he brought his arm back down and rinsed it off into the water and made his way over to the shore. And he started eating. He ate 2, 3, 6. He ate 9 of those trout. Then all of a sudden he stopped, and he turned and he looked right to where my grandfather was hiding. And he looked down at the trout that were sitting on the beach. And he took his paw and he whacked them over. 1, 2, 3. All 3 of those trout went flying right over to where my grandfather was hiding. The bear looked at him, winked, and off he went. And my grandfather swears that was that bear's way of paying for the molasses he'd been taking. Trueish story.